So thank you, and thank you so much to the Aspen Ideas Festival. Really grateful to be here with you folks, and appreciate the opportunity to be a little bit of the countercultural or minority in terms of our ideas here.
Okay, so we've got a couple of feminists here. They're telling us they're part of the counterculture, part of the minority of ideas at this Aspen Ideas Festival. I think you'll find that feminism is not part of the minority of ideas or a counterculture. It is actually mainstream culture, and the majority of the world is run on feminist ideals, and it's getting worse. So these two are going to, one of them's written a book, and they're going to talk about that, and they're going to do a bit of navel gazing and what I guess they would call analysis of the situation. So this get your popcorn. This should be interesting.
Mona Charen is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's an author, columnist, and host of her podcast, Need to Know. Prior to her current position, she was a speechwriter for Nancy Reagan, and also worked with the Reagan White House Public Affairs Office. She's the author of 2 books, but her newest book is this book, Sex Matters, which just came out in June. Tuesday. And in the interest of the kind of conversation that we're going to be having about including issues of work-life balance and having it all, she is married to Robert Parker and mother to 3 sons.
Who is here tonight? Robert Parker is right in the back.
And with that, I think we will jump right into it. I think
a feminist called Mona. You just can't make this stuff up, I'm telling you. Oh, God. And she's obviously excited about her book there, so that's fair enough. I know where she's coming from there. I've written 6 books already. Books. One of them's a short story. So, yeah, I can see her being excited, but I just had to make the point, feminist called Mona. Oh, I love it. Okay.
The first thing that we're going to be discussing, obviously we're talking about the relevance of feminism today and what American women think about feminism and why that might be. And I think it would be amiss to start the conversation without noting that the overwhelming majority, 2/3 of American women, reject the label feminist. What does that say about feminism, about its relevance today to American women?
So usually when people introduce this statistic, the response is, well, there must be something that these women are not in touch with. They don't realize their own best interests, and it's up to us to show them that they really should be feminists, because being feminist is what it means to be pro-woman. And but I think that the polling is telling us something. It is telling us that the image that feminism has in the wider public is and if you go down into the polls, you will see the responses that people think that feminists are too extreme, that they're anti-male, right, and that they're anti-family. And so
so the polls are telling them something, that women think feminism's too extreme, anti-male and anti-family, and it's to do with the image of feminism. The feminism or the feminists are not projecting the right image, and that's why people don't want, or women don't want to have anything to do with feminism. It's a significant majority of women in the US, what she's saying is, you go down into the polling and find out what it's about: male hating or man hating, anti family. And too extreme. That's exactly what modern feminism is. It's got nothing to do with image. That's exactly what feminism is today. This is her analysis of the situation, is that it's just to do with image. Well, what about the actual doctrines and philosophy and rhetoric of feminism today? That's what the women are seeing. They're not just got some fucking image you know, with the Betty Boop there with a feminist, you know, the World War II women can do anything fucking symbol that they've resurrected recently. No, you know, this analysis is, oh God, feminist analysis of the problem. Women can do no wrong. Must be something else. Image.
Those are some of the critiques that I have also had of feminism. While I completely endorse a lot of the reforms that feminism had a role in introducing into our society, equal pay, women are the full legal, moral, political equals of men, but the feminist movement made some mistakes, and we haven't grappled with that. We have not had a reckoning about where the movement took some wrong turns. And I try to lay out in the book where I think those were. They fall into a few different categories, but I won't filibuster. I'll just say they endorsed the sexual revolution, which was not a good idea for anybody. They denigrated family life. And they insisted that there are no differences between men and women, which caught them up when science showed that that was just not true. So they wound up in a position where they were denying science.
So feminism took some wrong turns, and they haven't addressed them. It hasn't been an accounting. First wrong turn was endorsing the sexual revolution. Now, the sexual revolution came about mainly through contraceptives. So the pill came out in the early 1960s, late 1950s. It was developed and then just obviously marketed to young women, and with the ability to have sex without fear of getting pregnant. They were, you know, hormones took over and away they went. So feminism jumped on the bandwagon on that one. Apparently, I think it would have happened with or without feminism. So I'm not sure where she's coming from on that point. Killing the nuclear family. That's to do with the left wing, the Marxist history of feminism. They're pulling down the capitalist patriarchy by destroying the nuclear family, and that's well documented as well known. So there is that. They wound up in a position where they were denying science to do with differences between men and women. So that's morphed sort of into the trans activism today. They haven't rolled any of it back because, of course, women are never wrong, you see. So it's just a matter of now doubling down on what they've got wrong in the first place, and keeping on going. But from come at it from a different angle through the trans activism and putting little kids on fucking hormone blockers and just this is where women want to run the world. They say the world would be a better place if women were in control. That's feminism, and look at the fucking mess that they're in. Like, it's just, I mean, I find it funny. Okay, I just like it is an entertaining topic for me.
And so for those three reasons, I think they took some wrong turns, and I would love to see a discussion about where they went wrong and where they can course correct. We can all course correct.
So it's interesting because often when conservative women push back against the idea of feminism, we are told that it's actually that the definition of feminism is the political, social equality of the sexes, And that seems to be an idea they think that everybody should be able to get behind. But you point out a long history of academic feminism in this book. You have an entire chapter about sort of the history of academic feminism, where some of the ideas came from. Where you mentioned you think it went wrong. Where do you think were those kind of academic or intellectual turning points where feminism split from a mere equality?
So Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique in 1963, and that was considered sort of the groundbreaking book that changed the world. And in some ways it was, although I take issue with the how much it really affected women going into the workforce. It did to some degree, no doubt. But as I point out in this book, the movement of women into the workforce predated feminism, predated Friedan, and predated the modern feminist movement. It had a lot to do, I suppose, with the changing economy, changing from an industrial to a post-industrial or information economy.
So she supposes that it had something, this transition of women into the workplace had something to do with the transition in the economy to a post-industrial or information service economy. And this, she's talking about the 1960s, late 50s, 1960s. Now there were quite a few innovations made in the late 1950s, early 60s. That's for sure. That's definite. As far as the industries were concerned, they were still labour intensive. There were no robots like we have today. But I've had a long career in the IT industry, and I can tell you the information and service side of the economy didn't even, in the early 1980s, it wasn't even there. Like before the advent of the personal computer, there was information. There were some electronic typewriters available, but there was no word processing going on or anything like that. There's no email until the internet. The world was completely different to what it is today back then. So that transition into the workplace by women is in large part due to the fact that the sanitary conditions in the workplaces, and to do with their periods and their tampons and whatnot, became more widely available and more acceptable. In the 1950s, there weren't tampons or sanitary pads, all the rest of it. They handled their periods in a different manner to how they do it today. Today is that's really what freed women up to go into the workplace, was the change in their or the accommodation of their sanitary requirements by the workplace for a start, and the society around them. So to leave that out of the equation as a feminist is it's probably the biggest aspect of the analysis to do with women moving into the workplace. And she's like imagining some history where in the late 50s and early 60s there was a transition to the information and service economy. The level of analysis that goes on in these feminist circles is woeful. It's pitiful.
Which plays more to women's strengths, the increasing wealth of the society, greater education for women, gave them more opportunities and more things to spend money on. I mean, during the 1930s and 40s, people were desperately poor and didn't have the opportunity to even contemplate luxuries. So I try to put that in perspective. But so Betty Friedan comes along and she writes her blockbuster, and there are many things wrong with the book. I was looking at the 50th anniversary edition that was recently published, and it was somebody said it was readable, and I thought, really? I mean, it's about 500 pages, or it felt like it, and it was full of anecdotes and kind of what we would now label junk science. But
so what I get from that is one of the foundational works in the modern feminist movement is just basically the musings of some woman who is barely literate by the sounds of it, and she's anecdotes and junk science, and that's one of the foundational pillars of modern feminism. It's no wonder that there's so many problems with it, and why no one really wants to have anything to do with it. It's like, if that's from a feminist. This woman's a feminist, and she's saying that one of the foundational writings of modern feminism is junk science and anecdotes. I mean, oh, Jesus.
Her big focus was getting women out of the house and into the workplace. That was her goal, and that was what her book was about. So that's 63. 1970, 7 years later, along come the really furious sorority of radical feminists who dominate the bestseller lists in 1970. You had Germaine Greer, Kate Millett, and Shulamith Firestone. They were beyond Betty Friedan. And by the way, it's interesting about Betty Friedan, she changed her mind later. She's the only one of those major second-wave feminists who actually was a mother. And she later wrote a book called The Second Stage, where she basically retracted a lot of what she had said in The Feminine Mystique, but that's a footnote. So these feminists, the more radical ones who came along in the 70s, in 1970, were also part of the New Left. And their project was way beyond women being in the workforce or, pay equity or things like that. Their agenda was to smash the patriarchy, as they put it. And by that, they meant that all of the standards about family life had to go out the window, that the family was the greatest obstacle to women's happiness.
Yeah. So the radical feminists of the 70s, and they weren't interested in women in the workplace and pay equity, because the Pay Equity Act came in 1963 in America. Right? I've got a video showing all of the history around that. So the 1970s feminists really had nothing to work with, except now they've invented the patriarchy out of thin air and decided to destroy the nuclear family because of their left-leaning political views to do with Marxism and the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the class society. So they changed it from a class fight to a gender fight, and that's where we are today. Well, that's continued, and they've all just doubled down on everything. And Germaine Greer, of course, has come out as anti-trans in the last few years, and so she's no longer flavour of the month. They've all attacked her for being, off message and working against the feminist ideal of destroying the patriarchy. It's like, to me, it's what they've done is they've realised that there's fuck all left to fight for in reality. So in order to keep their jobs and their tenure and being able to keep the money rolling in, they've got to invent something else. And look, here's some thoughts from some post-Marxist philosophers, and let's just turn that into feminism. We can roll that in. Oh, patriarchy, yes, patriarchal society, blah 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 blah. And and people take them seriously. That's the crazy thing about it, is that they're not just laughed out of the room. Anyway, carry on.
And they were explicit about it, and that was when the movement took a sharp wrong turn.
So speaking of happiness, we have a lot of surveys on women's happiness going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then on through the modern era. And you point out that a rise in women's happiness did not correlate with feminist gains. In fact, we see more and more women telling surveyors that they're unhappy. And I mean, you point to the criticism of the family life. Is that because women have maybe missed out on some things that had made them happy before? Is it because they realized they went out into the world and into the workforce and realized it was, not a friendly place for women due to the patriarchy or whatever other explanation? I mean, you could think of a lot of different explanations for this. Why do you think that women are less happy today, according to these surveys, than they were?
Women went out into the workplace and found it was not a very nice place to be, and this is why they're so unhappy, because of patriarchy. So just blame the men. Okay, it's got nothing to do with the women. They're just little tiny automatons who really can't think for themselves. They have no agency, you see, but they're not objects. Like, you can't treat them as objects. They can treat themselves as objects on things like OnlyFans, of course, but you can't treat them as objects, and yet they're incapable of agency, and it's all men's fault. It's all the patriarchy, you see. Yeah, it's just anyway. That's part one. Well, I don't know how many parts I'm going to have on this one, but it's I find it hilarious.